Okay, thanks for the positive signal. So, this was the way I was introduced in the program, and I now propose to have two changes. The first one is I would like to extend the remit of the student to lifelong learner. And instead of just student mobility, I would like to talk about the lifelong learner journey. But to make a start, I would like to start with some facts and figures. So my name is Christoph Graf. I'm working for the Swiss National Research and Education Network. And it's relatively easy to spot where this is, because what you see here is a map of the EU, and there is an anomaly in the middle. There's a hole, and this is where I'm from. So now you see kind of the hole, but filled with contents. And I'm now going to talk about what's happening inside this hole. So we do have some services up and running on the field of identity for about 2 decades. And this is a summary of the history of those 2 decades. So we have started in 1999 with kind of shaping the concepts of our identity services. We introduced the AAI in 2003. We then moved on, onboarding all the universities. We achieved this goal basically in 2008. So that's kind of the ramp up of our identity AAI. From then on, it still went up. So the number of accounts grew. And that was mostly due to the community growing itself. So we had more students joining the university, more staff needed to accommodate them. And that was the growth. But what happened afterwards, this is the impact of the changed identity services we have, because we kind of oriented ourselves to the students or to the lifelong learners. And I'm now going to talk about this. The number of organizations in here, you see that it's growing to about 70, which means that we covered all of the academic and a little bit beyond. Resources, I think we've got quite a high number of resources in here. It's more than 1,000 endpoints which are registered in our federation. Talking about numbers, this population of Switzerland is about 8.5 million people. So when we talk here about 700, then we are reaching about almost 10% of the population in Switzerland. So we had quite a successful service up and running starting 2003. The whole community in 2008 was onboarded, but still we thought, what is coming next? And then we thought, well, if we look at it, our identity services, they look like this. When you start university, you get an identity. Afterwards, it's lost. We don't know what happened before, and what is happening afterwards, we don't care. Even though you might return as a postgraduate, maybe for further education, you might return several times, and this is regularly happening. So when we look at the journey of a lifelong learner, then we see what we have here is suboptimal. We would like to have something else. And we came up with this picture more than 10 years back. We didn't have a clue at that time how to solve this, but this was the goal and our starting point. So we said, we want to better service our lifelong learners, and we are going to change our identity services to make this happen. That was the promise made 10 years back. And then we thought, actually, life starts, or the lifelong learning journey starts even earlier. That's something we wanted to look into as well. The AI data model looks like this. It's quite familiar to those in identity landscape who know about AAI. You get attributes like your name, your first mail, email, affiliation, and other things. Sometimes more, sometimes less. And sometimes you release more of that stuff to services, sometimes less. It depends. And this model, we wanted to change it to look like this. So instead of having just one affiliation, there can be more than one. it could also be the case that some of the affiliations are no longer active because you left school, you changed job, whatever, but we still know that it happened. So this is information which might be valuable in the future. And in between, when you do not have one of those affiliations, you still should be able to communicate to services, to be recognized as the same person, etc. And that's why we need a personal part or personal element of the identity. And this needs to stay for a longer time. And that's the model we use in our eduID. For those familiar with self-sovereign identities, it might ring a bell, but we will get back to that one later on. So this is what we had in the AAI world. So the user connects to the where are you from server, and there you identify the organization you belong to, identify yourself at this organization. Data is transported in your name to the service. You can log in there and use the service, and the service knows who you are. This is familiar, and this is what we changed. And it's quite a drastic change for the organization in a way, because we take away the IDP, we operate one for the whole community. We establish backend processes to aggregate the attributes from multiple organizations, and then the same picture. The user logs into the IDP, information is transported to the service, and the service knows who you are. In this case, the service might even know that you are kind of affiliated with more than one organization. That's information we have, and we can give this information to the service if needed, etc. So we have more options. But this is the change from the AAI to the eduID, and we worked on this in the last, well, about 7-8 years. And to make this happen, of course, we needed a project. This is the roadmap of this project. And in the first half of this project, we kind of developed the concepts, the services, or an initial form of the services. And starting 2017, the focus shifted. It shifted to deployment and adoption. So we helped the organizations to onboard on this infrastructure. And now the project is almost over. It runs till the end of this month, and then it's over. So we got a substantial amount of money, federal money for this to happen. And now it's the end of this. What did we achieve? The green dots here are the organizations who made the move or completed the move. The red ones are the ones who are still working on it. And the blue ones are the ones who should start working on it, but didn't do that yet. But a nice number, and many of the big ones, they made this move and are now on the eduID. This is a picture we try to kind of collect a number of key indicators of how well we do. And a very important one, it's the top green one. It's the number of active users. And there you see that we have about 500,000 users now on the eduID. Some, about 200, are still missing, but we have quite a big share. And we know now that the eduID is not just during your studies or during your employment at the university. It also works before and afterwards, if you want. And if you look at those who are kind of no longer affiliated with an organization, but used to be at an earlier stage, we see that already 15% of the users on our eduID are of that kind. So they are no longer affiliated, but they still have the identity and still can make use of it for some services. It's not the same services you get access to during studies, but it's a subset, and you're still kind of eligible to access those services. And we also see that about 55% of the users are currently affiliated, and quite a big number is not. And the biggest number of those not affiliated are users of libraries. we count them to the community. They are not students. They are not kind of not employed by a university, but they use their services, and we count them in our community, and they have access that way. And it's, of course, it doesn't stop here, because research has no borders. So it's important that we can collaborate with the global research community. And of course, this is done through the collaboration with Géant and eduGain. And there, of course, we have got a large population in terms of users and a large population in terms of services. On a national scale, there are other opportunities out there which we would like to follow up on. EduLog, for example, is an identity federation of primary schools and secondary schools. And we work together with them. And I will show in a minute how this is looking like. Other examples are the Swiss Library Service Platform, where lots of the libraries collaborate in Switzerland now with the same platform. And this platform is exclusively accessible with the help of the eduID. We had a public vote. It was downvoted to establish a national eID, but we are trying to help to make it happen in the second go. If the government wants us in, we will see. And we have collaborations of other kinds in the health sector. And yeah, that's something we would like to work on as well. Now, EduLog for the schools has its own page. Here it's kind of, you can look it up, what they are trying to do. It's an identity federation of schools, which are under a completely different governance than what we are doing at Switch. But we collaborate and we help them to establish the concept of their federation. When you now look at the journey of a lifelong learner, when you start at school, then yes, first you are at school, then you leave school. You might enter our community. So you get from EduLog, you get to Switch eduID. You might return, because if you are becoming a teacher, you might return to school as a teacher in a different role. And if you are a teacher, you're very likely to go for your further education back into the tertiary sector. And those are exactly the use cases we would like to cover, and we are currently working on exactly those ones. Now, there is also a journey across national borders for student mobility. And we've got very nice concepts of how this can be built, where Géant played an important role, and eduGain, where Switch is part of. And there are other elements, for instance, EIDAS, where Switzerland is not part of. And then you have Erasmus without paper. You get Erasmus Plus, where Switzerland isn't a member either. So Switzerland on this side, how does that work together? Big question mark. If we can be of any help to bridge this gap, then of course we will. Currently, we do not really know how. So, well, we might call it like that. Brussels, we have a problem, and apologies for how our government behaves towards Brussels. So, an outlook. This is what we have right now. We've got users, we've got services, we've got universities, and we try to orchestrate this with the Switch eduID. And now, getting back to, if you are familiar with the concepts of self-sovereign identities, then you might say, well, we might replace users with holders, services with verifiers, universities with issuer, and with SSI. Of course, it needs a bit more than that. We still see ourselves in the role of orchestrator and enabler. Currently, we are an IDP, but this is going to change slightly in SSI world. And if you look at what we have right now, so we're operating an IDP and transport the attributes to the services. We do that on behalf of the user, but of course, we could do it in a slightly different way. We could add, or we could give the user a wallet. They could collect those those verifiable credentials and transport those themselves to the service. And this is something we are currently envisaging of doing in the future. Nothing decided, nothing implemented yet, but it's kind of the way we think we are heading forward. And of course, if there are other verifiable credentials, other attributes from outside of our community, then of course they can be added to the wallet as well. And why not an EID, if that will eventually see the light, and then you can transport our attributes alongside with EID attributes to the service. And we are much better prepared for future use cases where we want to bridge the gap from our community and work together with other communities, be it national, be it international. And that way we would like to be prepared for the future. Back in November, we commissioned the first report on this, which shows us the new role we might assume in such a world. And we continue to work along those lines.